Hope and Fear is the finale of Season 4 and the last episode with Jeri Taylor on board. Despite appearances, she actually wasn't involved in the story. Well, no more than any other episode given that she was executive producer. It was discussed in advance as a possible finale to the season, and for that reason, it underwent a lot of changes. From Janeway spilling coffee inspiring her to use a fluid decryption algorithm in order to decipher the episode message, to a head-to-head confrontation as Janeway on one ship and Seven on another barrel at each other in a game of space chicken, to what we have eventually. The episode's creation was chronicled in detail, but the long and short of it was that they were struggling to pull the pieces together on this one. So much so that Taylor arranged a story conference in her office to try and hammer out the problems. When that wasn't working out, Brago left over lunch to talk to Rick Berman, who, as you can see from the credits this week, took an active interest in the details. Although this royally screwed up Taylor's meeting, which I guess shows why this was an environment she felt she was ready to move on from. The long and short of it was that Voyager's season finale was going to be a standalone episode rather than a two-parter. They'd had two already in Season 4, plus the end of last season's cliffhanger and that story's coda, so really, a single tale was a way to ensure they didn't end the series on a down note, keeping things concentrated instead of ultimately padding it out. This was especially important given that it was a season-ending episode. When Michael Piller wrote the first part of Best of Both Worlds, he had no plan for the resolution, since it was unclear what might change during the break. He was always proud of how he'd pulled a rabbit out of his hat and made the second part a satisfying conclusion to the story, but it set the precedent that they would frequently make the first half of their cliffhanger and usually not know what the second was going to be. When Ron Moore joined at the start of Season 6 of Voyager, he discovered that this was a tradition that they'd been practicing, which left them scrambling to put together a Part 2 for Equinox. So a two-part Hope and Fear was a crisis avoided, since they could be dealing with that kind of problem and having a change of management too. But let's get started on the episode that was made, which begins with Seven and Janeway playing a game of Velocity, for those who like skeet shooting and Tron. Janeway pulls an implausible victory out of her ass, a fitting metaphor for her approach to leadership actually, and Seven is incredibly annoyed at this. That's someone with, well, let's not beat around the bush. She's younger, with cybernetically enhanced strength, reflexes, and senses, while Janeway sits in a chair for a living and subsists entirely on coffee and cigarettes. It's like watching Serena Williams lose a game of racquetball to Ozzy Osbourne. Seven takes the 4-6 loss with the humiliation that it deserves, and insists on continuing, banking on her stamina to allow her to triumph once Janeway is doubled over wheezing and mopping her brow with Twinkies. But Janeway's calling it quits and leaves, ending our teaser. After the title, she reminds us of the data burst they'd picked up 5 months ago thanks to that array that we covered in Message in a Bottle, and they still haven't decrypted it yet. She's really getting frustrated, which explains why no one but Chakotay is willing to be in the room with her right now. He's got enough experience to know when to duck.
A map? The location of a wormhole. If I could decode this today, Chakotay, we could be home tomorrow. Then again, it could be Admiral Chapman's recipe for the perfect pound cake.
I wouldn't rule that out. This is Admiral Lardass we're talking about. He might plan for you to eat your way back home. Janeway considers asking Seven for some help, but isn't so sure if there's going to be cooperation given her resistance of late. And that conflict is close to the heart of the episode, even if it's tangential to the overall plot. Considering everything that was needed, Hope and Fear was pretty heavy on special effects, to the point where cutting corners elsewhere was sometimes called for.
I don't remember what this is. Neelix!
Such as convincing props, and a rubber jellyfish isn't the last we'll see today. Neelix is too busy introducing Janeway to the guy who helped ensure that this trade deal they just arranged went through smoothly, because the universal translator malfunctioned, and this guy just stepped up and decrypted the languages of both parties after listening to just a little bit of it. His name is Arturis, although pardon me if it sounds more like Arturis sometimes. I've no idea why, because I don't even play World of Warcraft. Anyway, as thanks for his help, they're going to give Arturis a ride.
You couldn't have heard Neelix say more than a few phrases.
It was all I needed. It was enough to grasp the grammar and syntax.
Language does not work that way. He explains that it was easy, though, because his people are gifted with the ability to determine the patterns within seeming chaos, which naturally piques Janeway's interest given the puzzle that she's struggling with. He agrees to look at the data, so Seven calls it up, and she piques his interest. Not for the sexy, well, not completely, but the fact that she is Borg. His species is one of the oldest the collective is aware of, and has eluded assimilation. But he has no resentment. The Borg is like a storm. Getting peeved at it won't solve anything in his view, so there's no point. Anyway, he solves the problem, mostly, and they have a ton of data, as well as coordinates to what looked like a super advanced Starfleet ship. Chakotay, Paris, and Tuvok beam over to check it out and learn it's the Dauntless, NX-01A. The A being inspired by the captain of the first NX-01, yes, Captain Asshole. An inspection reveals this is a ship that never had a crew. It was sent here on autopilot, and they're surprised when the engine starts up. When they go to check it out, they don't find a warp core. They find some kind of exotic reactor, which is powered by a plasma globe. I'm guessing the nacelles are actually 2 lava lamps at this point. The ship has a quantum slipstream drive, which comes on automatically and sends them flying off and traveling 2 days' worth of distance in a matter of mere minutes, maybe even seconds. The message from the Admiral says that the design is based on new technology, which has been used for short trips, but it's the best chance for Voyager's crew to get back home, though it will require leaving Voyager itself behind. Naturally, they're going to see if they can instead use this with Voyager.
But I don't think the ship would hold up very long under the quantum stresses.
Quantum stresses joins interferometric as terms that are real but nothing like how they use them. Voyager has turned science into dad jokes. My uncle will be arriving at relativistic speed, and my girlfriend prefers natural selection when buying produce. Making up for this is the second half of this scene. My problem with Janeway is generally overlapped significantly with my problem with Jonathan Archer. Oh, don't worry, he's a bigger buffoon than her by a mile. But the root problem is that they don't know how to write the character a lot of the time. So an attitude is adopted of, the captain making the decision is proof that the decision is correct. And there's frequently no basis for this. Spirit folk showed that. Janeway was flat out wrong, and the only thing that prevented a completely avoidable loss of life was good timing. I don't think you're a brilliant leader when you drunkenly stumble through a minefield in clown shoes and manage not to blow yourself up. So I appreciate moments like this when she speaks to Tuvok in private about the situation that they have here, and it finally feels like this was what the show was supposed to be about all along. Her and her confidant, with her showing sound judgment and real leadership. Now, as you'll see in a bit, she'll eventually make face and palm come together in exasperation, but for now, her private skepticism and the way that she goes about it makes her finally seem like the leader she's supposed to be, instead of a continued reminder of the writer's shortcomings. As for Seven, she has learned that there are similarities between transwarp and quantum slipstream, so she'll be trying to fill in the gaps in their understanding, and maybe make this work with Voyager. She isn't comfortable with the idea, though, and while working with Torres, remarks on the illogic of her excitement to return to what is probably a trial for her Maquis behavior. Torres' jocular response that Seven would be equally unpopular unwittingly reinforces her belief that going to Earth is a terrible idea. So she's anxious while Janeway is suspicious, and the two wind up meeting in astrometrics as Janeway is going over the part of the data that Arturis said was beyond recovery. Thus Janeway is not receptive to Seven's point of view. She says she understands it, but the truth is gradually revealed that she won't let Seven leave because Seven's expertise is needed on this mission. You can try to color it by saying that she's doing this ultimately for Seven's best interests, especially when she points out that Seven is afraid, which is true. But Janeway is also clearly blinded by her own needs, that she will disregard Seven's own wishes and disregard the legitimate basis of that fear. Let me show you just how blind she is.
This crew needs your expertise. Abandon them and you diminish their chances of getting home.
Irrelevant.
No, it's not. We've given you a lot, Seven. It's time you gave something in return.
What? I taught you transwarp physics. Doesn't count. We couldn't figure out how to make it work. I discovered we were being experimented on by aliens. I uncovered evidence that eventually showed Tom Paris was replaced by an alien. And I was instrumental in freeing us from the World War II holodeck simulation. Yawn. I was indispensable in the reconstruction of astrometrics, which not only got you closer to home, but led to the array that allowed you to get this message in the first place. But you didn't do it entirely by yourself, so it doesn't count. I got Voyager through the nebula single-handedly, thereby saving every last member of the crew. Yeah, that was last week. What about now, huh? Time for you to give something back, freeloader. Like so often happens, Janeway says something that is not only false, but obviously false. And this is presented as truth. She is right because she is the one who said it, and I only dwell on that because it's a key part of the plot. Anyway, Janeway's new algorithm works, and she gets the real message from the Admiral, which contradicts the slipstream. And that backs up what Harry had seen, so there's clearly something weird going on with the technology of that ship that implies that it's not Starfleet. Clearly, Arturis created a false message, meaning either this is his plan or he's at least involved in the plot. She confronts him, but he turns it around on Seven, saying that she tampered with the message. Well, Janeway doesn't buy that, so Arturis tries to work the controls. Tuvok shoots him, which naturally does nothing more than make his shirt dirty because that's the level of effectiveness guns have. They're now set to stain. And so the lever he pulls turns the Dauntless into some kind of alien ship, and he throws up a force field. Everyone but Seven and Janeway get beamed back before he blocks the transport, and he takes off at slipstream speed. Chakotay, without many options open, decides to use the slipstream to try to catch up that way. They're going to have to figure out some way to wrangle it in order to make it work, but of course they will. But only temporarily. Technology that can get Voyager home has a shorter shelf life than milk stored in a warm cupboard.
Is this what your people do? Prey on innocent ships?
Innocent. Typical of Captain Janeway. Self-righteous.
Damn, he's got my number all right. Arturis is here because Janeway decided to ally herself with the Borg way back in Scorpion.
Did it ever occur to you that there were those of us in the Delta Quadrant with a vested interest in that war? Victory would have meant annihilation of the Borg, but you couldn't see beyond the bow of your own ship!
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
In my estimation, Species 8472 posed a greater threat than the Borg.
Who are you to make that decision? A stranger to this quadrant.
There wasn't exactly time to take a poll. I had to act quickly.
When Arturis explains what happened because of that decision, her response is, I couldn't have known. I find it hilariously sad that we once again see those who apply the Prime Directive's letters so heartlessly with the mantra, who are we to play God? You don't know what the consequences will be. Will then brush off any point when they play God with, I couldn't have known about that. It's especially egregious when that decision was predicated on what they could get out of it. As a result of that, Arturis people, who were barely a step ahead of the Borg, were finally overwhelmed and assimilated. I do really like the way Ray Wise plays this, even if some felt it was a bit over the top.
The outer colonies were the first to fall. 23 in a matter of hours. Our sentry vessels tossed aside, no defense against the storm. And by the time they had surrounded our star system, hundreds of cubes. We had already surrendered to our own terror. A few of us managed to survive, 10, 20,000. I was fortunate. I escaped with a vessel, alone, but alive. I don't blame them. They were just drones, acting with their collective instinct. You had a choice!
So Arturis decided to get revenge by tricking them onto this ship and taking them to be assimilated. It's a bit convoluted. He managed to sabotage Neelix's universal translator, assuming this wasn't just an incredible coincidence, of course, doctored up a fake message, inserted the fake message into the computer in front of Janeway and Seven without them somehow noticing. And that's over and above figuring out the layout of the Dauntless to be a convincing trap, meaning he needed to both stalk Voyager and track down information out of the Federation at the same time. Any of these are a stretch, but all of them together? Ugh. I'll give them this, though. The episode is packaged in such a way that these aren't glaringly obvious flaws, but in retrospect, it's like, damn, Rube Goldberg would be impressed. Arturis gets them into a cell where Janeway will reprogram Seven's systems by poking her eyepiece with a paperclip, naturally. It gives them a moment to get past Seven's hang-ups about going to Earth. The reconciliation is, of course, tell me how I was right all along. But in any event, Seven is now able to walk through the force field and free Janeway so they can sabotage the ship before they return to Borg space. They can't, though, but they can at least screw with the piloting, so that slows things down while Janeway heads to the bridge to confront Arturis.
I can't begin to imagine your loss, but try to see beyond your desire for revenge.
Look at the bigger picture. This was never about you. This was about doing what was more convenient for me at the time. Fucking you over was the furthest thing from my mind. So, pals. Arturis is somehow unconvinced and disables navigational control to ensure that Seven can't stop him. But that's when Voyager arrives to save them, just before Arturis tries to shoot Janeway to ensure that she can't escape. Well, he fails at that too. And instead, he is assimilated when the ship arrives in Borg space. But on the bright side, you did give Voyager the means to get 300 light years closer to home, so nice vengeance there, Chrome Dome. Seven is going to study the tech, Janeway gives her a pat on the back, and the end. Post-episode follow-up. Stupid Neelix's moment is him nearly getting them all assimilated by bringing Arturis on board. You'd think someone with his claims would have a better bullshit detector. Final score for Hope and Fear is 6 out of 10, though I think that improves if you aren't let down by the yet another think they're getting home plot. If you're keeping score, this was the 7th time they'd done this. It's helped by them not showing everyone discussing their plans on getting back like usually happens, though. Keeps things flowing more smoothly and avoids retreading trampled ground. As far as the rest of the episode, Janeway had some good moments and some bad moments. And while I think it's interesting to explore the dynamic that she and Seven has, the idea that it is a mother-teenage daughter with all the rebelliousness that involves isn't nearly as appealing. The character of Seven has a lot of potential, so I find that simplification disheartening. Still, the episode avoids dragging, which allows the events to hold your interest, something that can't always be said about the franchise, never mind Voyager. Overall, there were worse ways to end the season, like with a cliffhanger.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
I'm afraid.